Hello, everyone, and welcome to the event for Decolonizing Wellness. I should say the full name of the book, Decolonizing Wellness, a QT BIPOC-centered guide to escaping the diet trap, heal your self-image, and achieve body liberation. We are here with the author, Dalia Kinsey, RD, and I am Laura, your friendly event coordinator for your local indie bookshop. Um, if you don't know who we are a general interest bookstore in Astoria, Queens. And if you found us through the internet or through our lovely author today, you can find us at astoriabookshop.com. Before we get started, I do want to go through a few housekeeping things. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions down at the bottom there where it says ask a question, and you can vote on other people's questions if there's something you really want answered. You can chat with one another on the right. Please keep it respectful. I think it should be obvious with the subject of the book. Don't say anything wildly offensive. My go-to rule is nothing you wouldn't want your mom or boss to see, and that seems to work pretty well as a rule of thumb. And I will put up a link on the bottom for buying a signed copy of the book. Let's see. Now, okay, yeah, that's everything I had to do. Let's get started by introducing our guest. Whose bio I had? Okay. Dalia or Dalia?
Dalia.
Okay. Dalia Kinsey is a registered dietitian, keynote speaker, and inclusive wellness coach with years of experience working at the intersection of holistic wellness and social justice in public and private sectors. Dalia rejects diet culture and teaches people to use nutrition as a self-care and personal empowerment tool to counter the damage of systemic oppression. On a mission to amplify the health and happiness of BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ folks, Dalia continually creates wellness tools and resources that center the most vulnerable individuals that hold them multiple identities. Dalia's work can be found at www.daliakinsey.com. And just a reminder that Dalia goes by no pronouns, just Dalia. So please be respectful when referring to Dalia. And I think that is everything for me. I am going to drop the journal exercise so people can get a look at it in the chat, and you are free to take over.
Perfect. Thank you. I keep forgetting how old I am when I hear that bio, years of experience, but it's actually happened. Time really flies. I'm getting on up there. I want to start with a grounding exercise. Anyone who's been running around, trying to get home from work, I think before we go into the journaling, it would be a good idea to just take a moment to slow down and settle in. So I was thinking it was Zoom. I was going to say take yourself off cam. But what you want to do, if you're sitting on the ground, just make sure you are comfortable. If you are sitting in your chair, put your feet flat on the floor. I want you to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. And after you've taken about 5 deep breaths, feel the floor underneath your feet. Do you sense any tension in your feet? Do you feel fairly relaxed? Any cramping from not moving enough today? Just focus on your feet. Breathe naturally. Let's give it another 5 breaths. When you're breathing, you just want to breathe naturally, deep, but only as deep as is comfortable for you. Now, I want you to visualize your spine totally straight, erect, and sense what's going on with your posture right now. Do you feel contracted, restricted? Or do you feel like you're sitting up straight and your chest is open and you're really able to take deep breaths? If you're comfortable with how your posture is right now, don't change anything. If you feel like you're bound a little more tightly than you want to be, roll your shoulders back and open your chest up some more. Take 5 deep breaths. Now picture roots growing out of the base of your spine, running through your tailbone down into the floor, through the foundation of your home or your office, until you finally reach soil. Picture yourself grounded and unmovable. Breathe naturally and sense how you're feeling in the center of your chest. Try and put a word to the sensations that you're feeling in the center of your chest. If you feel uneasy, try to breathe directly into that space. Just being aware of the tension. If you can't relax it, that's fine. Just notice it. We're going to finish with a scan of your body from top to bottom. Continue taking deep breaths and just notice what the front of your face feels like. Do you feel any tension in your forehead? Is your jaw clenched? Are you grinding your teeth? Keep scanning. Do you feel any tension in your scalp? Any knots in your neck? Are your shoulders relaxed? Keep scanning down the center of your body. Has anything changed with the feelings you saw or sensed earlier in the center of your chest? Or is it the same? Now center your attention on your stomach, on your abdomen. When you're breathing, is your belly extending? Or is your chest moving more than your belly? There's no right or wrong, you're just noticing. Scan your upper thighs, your calves, your ankles. We're back to your feet. And now your toes. Wiggle your toes. Give it one more deep breath. Pull those roots back up. And that's it. We are grounded and we are ready to get into our journaling exercise. So you see the link in the chat here. It is a simple journal page, and the prompt is, what would my life be like if I trusted myself and prioritized my opinion above all others? Now, I'm looking at the clock. We're going to give you 5 minutes to think about that and really be honest with yourself and try to visualize what would be different. This isn't a time to judge yourself or maybe being prone to letting other people's opinions sway you. This is just an experiment. What would you be able to do? What would change? What choices might be different if your opinion was the most important thing and that determined what you did? So let's just give that 5 minutes. So we'll be back at 7:15. This doesn't have to be structured. If you just want to do bullets, that's fine. We're not in school. We don't need complete sentences if that isn't what you want to do. But just think about the first things that come to mind that you know right now you're doing, not because you want to, but because either someone has told you they would prefer you do something different, or you have been socialized to think that you're not allowed to do what you actually want to do. 2 more minutes. All right. We are back. Now, are you surprised by anything that came up for you? If you feel like sharing, you can in the chat. If you don't want to, absolutely no pressure. I know for me, when I started thinking about where am I allowing other people to make decisions for me, or where is my socialization or how I was raised, deciding what is right for me, even though I know in my gut that I want to do exactly the opposite, was something as simple as keeping dresses in my wardrobe long after I decided I didn't want to wear dresses anymore. I never wanted to wear dresses, but growing up in a very religious, conservative household, you always had to wear dresses to go to church. We were at church 24/7. So I spent most of my childhood in dresses and those ridiculous frilly church socks. Now, after I grew up, moved out, started trying to find my own way, what works for me, what's right for me, I still felt like I had to keep some dresses for occasions. I kept thinking if there's a funeral, I have to wear a dress. If I'm going to an interview, I have to wear a dress. And then I finally realized that I get to decide what I'm going to wear. And if my gender presentation and dresses don't mesh, then it doesn't matter if it's a formal event in the deep South. I can wear pants because I get to decide. And if someone isn't comfortable with that, then either they can get comfortable or get used to the idea that I won't be able to attend because I'm not going to compromise what I want to do to make other people comfortable, especially when it's something that really isn't affecting anyone else and they could be flexible and get over it. My comfort is just as important as their comfort, especially with something like gender identity. We're literally talking just ruffling feathers a little bit versus me getting to feel comfortable all evening. Now, that is a testament to how people are so into the patriarchy that if you are a femme presenting person who decides to do something that's deemed a little more masculine, well, that is going to probably bring you way less ridicule than if you're assigned male at birth and you prefer things that are typically associated with femme people. But that said, it still was so deeply ingrained in me. It seemed like it wasn't a choice. And when I started focusing on what do I really want to do? What is my gut saying? That was one of the things I noticed I didn't want to be bothered with anymore. When I threw all the dresses away, I felt like a weight had been lifted. Even though I wasn't wearing them, they were literally just hanging in the closet, just knowing that they were gone and that I never had to wear them again. No frilly, lacy things ever again. Just immediately felt more in tune, more aligned, like I was living my life as I would like to. But I wasn't able to come to that sort of realization without doing a lot of work first through therapy, through getting in touch with my body several times a day and learning what a yes feels like in my body and what a hell no feels like in my body made it possible for me to get clear on that was troubling me even though the clothes were behind a door. Just knowing they were there, it was an issue. So Emily says, not surprised, but good to get it out. Yes, really just being aware of a pattern is powerful. Sometimes we're not ready to change things. Sometimes it wouldn't be possible or even safe for us to change things, but just acknowledging what is can be very helpful. And with so many things, so much suffering just comes from wishing things would be different instead of accepting the reality of what is. Maybe wishing that you wanted what other people wanted you to want. Maybe that would be easier, but that isn't where we are. That isn't what it is. So let's just face the reality and see what we want to do from there. That's the first step, is just noticing. So now I want you to ask yourself, what do you think is stopping you? And you don't have to write this down if you don't want to, but you've already identified what your life would look like, what major things would change if your opinion was more important than anyone else's opinion. What is stopping you from making that your actual life? And this could be a totally legitimate fear. Maybe you know that totally doing what you want to do, especially if it involves something like gender expression or even accepting your body, if your body is deemed unacceptable by many people, You may fear that this could interrupt your ability to earn a living, that it could literally interfere with your ability to keep yourself safe and housed. So, if there is an obstacle there, not all of these obstacles are imaginary, and we can always wish these away with some coaching. Sometimes the issues that we're facing that are stopping us from fully claiming all of our identities and doing what we want to do are very legitimate. So if that is what's coming up for you immediately, I want you to acknowledge that and give yourself some compassion. And something that I find very helpful is just stating, you can write it out or you can state it for yourself. My life would look like this, or this would change if my opinion was the most important thing. And then, however, and acknowledge what that obstacle is, if it's a real obstacle versus maybe it's old training that makes it difficult for you to step into what you want, but it isn't actually dangerous for you to do what you want anymore. And acknowledge that that fear is real and that both things can be true, that you would like to have more freedom, but maybe there's an obstacle that you can't move. Maybe you're not the problem. Maybe the problem is bigger than you. Maybe if you later are able to move to a different area, maybe that would change. Like, there's so many factors that determine how much you're able to really claim your power and step into prioritizing your opinion over all others. The last thing I want you to ask yourself is, all that considered, what is one step you could take, or maybe one small thing you could do to capture that feeling of freedom and being connected to yourself and aligned with who you really are, that takes both of these previous questions into consideration? Is there anything you could do to get a little bit closer to the feeling that you would have if you were able to 100% prioritize your opinion above all others? And if you can't think of anything right now, that's okay too. These are just things to be aware of. Yeah, exactly. A lot of therapists and coaches just don't seem to understand that sometimes they're real obstacles and they're not our fault and it isn't in our head, and we're not going to be able to positive think it away, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what inspired the book. Now that we've taken a second to look at what self-trust and prioritizing your opinion would change in your life, and acknowledge all the things and training that makes that so difficult for most of us to claim, especially if you're assigned female at birth. If you're assigned female at birth, and if you're lucky enough to be from the South, you know that your training has been, don't challenge people, don't counter other opinions if you can avoid it at all. Nobody likes a mouthy femme person. It's better to go with the flow and not make waves. So think about how many times you've been trained, even rewarded for not making a fuss over something, being socialized, being brainwashed, however you want to look at it. It doesn't always look negative. There's positive and negative reinforcement. So even something that people we love maybe do without meaning us any harm, like maybe praising you as a child for never crying or never being difficult or always coming to your parents with the solution in hand, that is still training you that that is the more preferable, that's the desirable behavior. So when you do need extra support, when you do need extra help, are you going to feel comfortable saying that? Or do you feel like you're more valuable, you're more loved, you feel more secure if you are giving, serving, and not accepting any help, or acknowledging that sometimes you need support as well? When I first started my program as a young wannabe dietitian, I was still really, really invested in diet culture. And it wasn't even on my radar as something that I could divest from. And for anyone who's not familiar with that term, diet culture is essentially The system of beliefs that we see almost everywhere that prioritizes or values thin bodies above all else and conflates thinness with wellness and even with morality. So you see this in the way people talk about high fat, high sugar foods as being sinful. You can see how we project moral value on food that is considered bad and on fatness as well. So I wasn't questioning those structures, but as I kept going through the program, I kept seeing a lot of racial bias that I definitely recognized and as false immediately because I'm really connected to my experience as a Black American. And then I started to piece together, well, if all these other assumptions I know to be false, who's to say all of this body hierarchy stuff is also grounded in science? And are we really helping anybody by making people more judgmental of their physical selves? Like, is that really what we should be focusing on? And we see all the different ways that people phrase it, even trying to make it seem like it's a positive thing to have this hyper focus on the body and that it's going to be a helpful thing for marginalized communities. If we want to close the life expectancy gap, then you just need to assimilate more. You need to adopt these Eurocentric standards that say a thin body is best. And if you can help it, make sure that's a white body, a male body. Don't be poor either. And please be able-bodied. That's like the number one body. And everybody else falls underneath that. Not seeing that people in healthcare and wellness in the university setting, training future healthcare providers, not saying that anybody was acknowledging that this hierarchy is going unquestioned and we really don't have any justification for it. Like any type of hierarchical assumptions or white supremacy, thin body supremacy, cis supremacy, none of that was being questioned, and no one was looking at what role those factors might have on the wellness of individuals that have identities that are not celebrated. Like, what does it do to you to constantly be presented with the message that you are unacceptable and maybe you need to prove your worth? And what does it do to the providers and their ability to serve you when, on some level, they already think, well, queer folks, I know we've legalized gay marriage and all, but you still remember when people were treating queerness like it was a mental illness. Then you see higher rates of anxiety and depression among queer people. And having experienced queerness being treated as a disorder for so long, you start to believe that these two things go hand in hand and that the queerness is actually causing these other issues. Instead of noticing that what is causing these higher rates of anxiety and depression is not the queerness, because that's normal. The problem is the hostile treatment of queerness and anti-queerness that is exacerbating people's baseline stress. And we all already know that stress can tear the body apart. Everybody has seen this. Having lived through the pandemic, still living through the pandemic, everyone has physically experienced this, assuming that you acknowledge the pandemic is happening. Some people have not experienced this stress, but I really don't think those folks would be drawn to a space like this. So I'm sure everybody listening has experienced what stress can do to your health. Now, if we don't factor in the fact that some people's baseline stress levels are already elevated and stay elevated, then we're really not looking at the full picture when we talk about, oh, how can we improve the health outcomes of minority members? So if you are a marginalized person, if you are a clearly queer presenting person. So if you're walking down the street with your partner holding hands and you're on vacation in a city you're unfamiliar with, it would not be crazy. It would not be strange for you to be on high alert, for you to know that you need to be aware that there are homophobic people out there that can be very dangerous and aggressive, that you have to keep your head on a swivel and you can't completely relax because you don't know for a fact that you're totally safe. And sometimes in your own city, you can't totally be sure. What does it do to you to always be in that vigilant state? When we lived through the first part of this second wave of the civil rights movement, and BLM was picking up speed again in the middle of the, for me, most difficult part of the pandemic. My stress levels were through the roof. And all of the symptoms that I dealt with in college from high stress started coming back. I felt like I had them under control. They were behind me, but it got to a point that I could not manage with the level of anti-anxiety medication I was on. There was no amount of sunlight that was going to cut it, no amount of deep breathing. I just needed total rest, while the rest of the world was acting as though we should all keep going back to work. We need to be responsible working class people, prioritize, keeping the economy going, never mind about your well-being or rest. You don't need that. Working class people aren't allowed to rest, and people of color certainly aren't allowed to rest. All of that old messaging was putting up so many barriers to me taking the action that I really needed, which was to do nothing. And acknowledging that this socialization is not just specific to my family, to my lived experience, acknowledging that folks of color, especially Black folks in the United States, have been trained to constantly be productive. And that's the only way to prove that you're a good one. And in so many different ways, your family reinforces this, teachers reinforce this, television reinforces this. People only celebrate Black excellence, and you're not allowed to be a regular schmegular Black person. Like, you have to be fabulous at all times. You must be excellent at all times to prove to everyone that you're worthy, to prove that, oh, I really am a human being. What does it do when you take on that stress and that responsibility? In reality, racism, homophobia, transphobia, that is not the problem of the person with those identities. The problem is in the mind of the bigoted person. Now, it becomes our problem when the laws allow their bigotry to literally affect our lives and our well-being, and when their bigotry becomes violent. That's when it's a problem for us. However, it is not our responsibility to prove that we are human, to prove that we are worthy to anyone. But unfortunately, because we have to interact with all kinds of different people, if you have marginalized identities and you have to leave your house at some point, you're going to come into contact with people who make you feel unsafe. And that takes a toll on you. When I was about in, I think, my sophomore year of college, I had a major decline in health out of nowhere. I had hand tremors constantly. I had extreme fatigue. I could sleep for 12 hours, get in the car, fall asleep at 2 o'clock in the afternoon behind the wheel. There was nothing I could do to get enough rest. And my weight just kind of started drifting up, even though my diet had not changed at all. I was so fatigued, my physical activity levels definitely did plummet. I went to doctor after doctor. No one could seem to figure out what it was. Every visit was repetitive and frustrating. People kept giving me advice on, controlling my fried food intake, especially lay off fried chicken. Mind you, at the time I was a vegetarian, and no one could get past my skin color and my, at that time, pretty large body size to see that these symptoms were not my fault and not the direct result of some behavior I was engaging in. When I finally reached the physician that diagnosed me, the minute he walked in the room, he said, "Oh, look at that goiter," which I hadn't even noticed I had. "Look at your eyes. They were protruding." I hadn't noticed that either. You see one eye is still a little funny, even though I'm in remission. But he said, "Oh, I definitely think you have Graves' disease. We're going to do lab work and we're going to see for sure. But honestly, I think it's just me going through the motions. I'm pretty positive that's what you have." I went home, I did research, and I looked to see, like, what is Graves' disease? Never even heard of it before. And on multiple sites, out of a list of 15 symptoms, I had 14. So how is it that with the ability to go to the doctor whenever I wanted, which not everybody has that freedom, I had a job where, they knew I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I could go at any time. how is it that with insurance, with access to healthcare, that I still couldn't access useful interventions when healthcare providers are also being socialized to believe that femme presenting people, generally don't know what they're talking about, they're melodramatic. Then when you go into a healthcare setting, your symptoms are more likely to be dismissed than if you were male presenting. And also, the assumption is that Black folks are so ignorant that they don't even know how to feed themselves. Like, that's the subtext in a lot of these public health messages, that we just need to give the people more information. Well, what does that mean? You think there's a knowledge deficit. You always assume there's a knowledge deficit. Even when I came in, I filled out my paperwork. I clearly stated, like, I was already working as a nutritionist. I wasn't licensed yet. But why are you telling me about whole grains and vegetables when that's like literally what I do in public health? What are we doing here? And to assume that all Black folks eat fried chicken, like, seriously, this wasn't one visit, this was multiple visits. So finally, getting the correct diagnosis, getting treatment, I started to get better. But I literally could have died because people refused to see beyond their own biases or weren't even aware of their biases, from body size to race to gender. And then in other areas of life, it's very difficult to access equal treatment. When you think about sex ed, even for queer folks, it's virtually non-existent in most settings, in most public school settings, at least in my part of the country. So all of these things are obviously going to affect life expectancy. So to keep on focusing on individual responsibility is just irresponsible. These are systemic problems. There's this belief that you can somehow earn your way out of experiencing racism and homophobia, and that simply is not true. It does not matter how much money you make. It does not matter what type of access you have to healthcare. Because these problems are systemic, we are still being affected by racism due to no fault of our own. But that belief that you can somehow perform your way out of it and be exempted allows a lot of people to continue blaming the individual consumer when it comes to poor health outcomes. So in the book, I really dig into what we can do as individuals to improve our stress levels and what we can do to make sure we at least periodically put ourselves in safer spaces where we can finally relax and bring our stress levels down, get our nervous system to totally relax, at least periodically. And I've literally never been advised by anyone in public health, anyone in my typical, healthcare encounters, to make sure I spend time with other people with similar lived experiences. Literally never. And if you are a person of color, you know that oftentimes if you group together, it's always an issue. Even at work, someone always has to say something. If you go into a conference and you see someone and they're the same color as you, literally never have I been able to sit at a table with other Black femme presenting people without somebody having something to say. As though it literally gives people anxiety to see folks of color in a group. Clearly, that is linked to some deeper issues, and that racial bias is making it difficult for people to accept, like, maybe if you feel more comfortable with people who share some of your lived experience, that's okay. And that isn't something that you need to comment about. You don't need to discourage people from having that sense of safety. The only time that you can be open to really healing and really feeling your feelings and reconnecting to your ability to trust your own judgment and to believe that you actually know how to care for yourself, you know how to lead your own life, is if you're feeling safe enough to stop having to focus on all the other things that are survival related, to really start looking at why you're doing what you're doing and where you can make changes, How much of what you're doing is based on who you really are versus who you were socialized to be? And what do you actually have the power to tweak right now? So, starting the session out with calming down, coming into the present moment, and then looking at just 1, 2, 3 questions that direct your attention inward to see where you are right now and what do you really want. That's really important. There is no one size fits all for how we should go about improving your wellness in a holistic way. It has to be a path that you figure out for yourself. So the book is full of exercises that will direct your attention inward so that you can see where you want to focus and where you can create more space around some of these things that are deeply ingrained, in your mindset that aren't doing you any favors. Something as simple as how to feed yourself seems like it wouldn't really be connected to anything significant when it comes to, how you relate to your self-esteem or how you relate to your ability to make decisions in your life. But the whole concept of outsourcing the decision when it comes to what should I eat, how much should I eat, what do I actually want, that is damaging. If you continually ask someone else, well, what should I do in relation to a function that you 100% have the ability to decide on your own, you're reinforcing that idea that you need someone else to tell you what's right and undermining the importance of your own opinion. Now, if you are a queer person, for example, and from childhood you've been told that everything that you do intuitively is wrong or not right, like, oh, you're not even loving the way we've decided you should, or even as a person of color, if you've always been ridiculed for doing culturally distinct things, then you may question yourself when it comes to like what your gut is saying about how to even phrase something. Is this assimilated enough? Is this going to draw criticism? Are people going to laugh at me? Even when I got my hair locked, and this was in 2012, literally multiple white classmates acted like it was the funniest thing they ever heard, that this form of locking is called sister locks. I didn't name it. Why should I have to explain to you why some Black assigned female at birth people refer to each other as cis? And so the person who trademarked it felt like sister locks sounded like a good name. Why was that so funny? It was a cultural distinctness and the idea that white culture is number one, the bee's knees, and everything else is some kind of joke. Like, look at these people pretending to be human. Ha ha ha. Because where's the funniness? Where's the joke? It's only funny if you're assuming that there's a hierarchy there. So anything that deviates from what you deem as the most acceptable, the most important, is kind of a joke. And you just, you laugh it off. You don't respect it. You don't find it interesting. You don't really pay any attention to it. You certainly wouldn't ever bother to find out that like locking your hair has a lot of religious significance for some people. And for some people, if it's not tied to their religious practice, it still may have a lot of spiritual implications for them, which also explains why you really don't want randos touching your hair because you don't want their funky energy on you. But if you think your culture and your ethnic group is the most important, well, why would you learn about anyone else? Anytime somebody does something culturally distinct, you just think, oh, how weird, how primitive, ha ha ha. So if you've been exposed to that your entire life, of course, it is hard for you to trust yourself. That's not your default. You're always looking to see, but how do I do it though? What are the steps? And that's been something that's been challenging for me as an entrepreneur, as a person who wants to do things that I don't always know somebody who can model it for me. Accepting that the way I want to do it is good enough and that I don't need to look for a template. I don't necessarily need to do months or years of research trying to make sure I do everything the right way, I can just try it, test it, move on, test it, move on. But after years of being told it's not safe to trust my intuition, that took a lot of work to get to the point that I could trust, like, however you want to do it is fine. See if it gets you the results you want. If it doesn't, move on. It doesn't have to be a big thing. You don't have to criticize yourself for deciding to go one way and then changing your mind later. Now, when it comes to eating, since some of us have such a complicated relationship with eating, it doesn't seem intuitive that that would be a good place to start for rebuilding your sense of trust. But since it's something most of us do several times a day, I think it's a great entry point if you approach it as an experiment, not something else to put more shoulds on you, not something to put more pressure on you, but just a trigger for you to focus inward on what do you want? What are you feeling? What is your body telling you? What's going on? Why are you eating? Do you need something else? Do you need comfort? If you are not physiologically hungry and you start eating, you will never be able to get satisfied. And that is an important thing to note. If you are not hungry when you start eating, you cannot get satisfied because you are not hungry. So that's why if you sit down after a really, really stressful day and you grab the whole bag of chips, like who has time for a bowl, and you're not hungry, but you need something crunchy, like you're still livid about something ridiculous your boss said to you, in the last 30 minutes of the day, as they like to do, and you just need that crunch and that texture, and then you're shocked that you got down to the bottom of the bag, but you still don't really feel satisfied. That's because in that instance, you didn't really want the chips. You probably would have been better served by feeling your feelings and acknowledging your anger and validating your anger. And then if you want the chips, absolutely have it. But you really want food to be bringing you joy and pleasure, not just distracting you from other needs that you have. Because in that case, the most kind thing to do is to feel your feelings, validate your feelings, and then, move on with your day. But you'll only be able to sense what you actually need if you're feeling connected and in tune with your body. And this takes time because it's taken a lifetime for us to get as disconnected as we might be right now. So I see in the chat we have time for questions. I want to make sure that we prioritize that since y'all have me right here live. So looking through the chat. Yes, exactly. I love the eye roll for cheating on diets. Amen.
Yeah, I know. I thought the same thing. Okay, in that case, I'm going to pop in to facilitate the questions. It looks like we do have one, so we might wrap up a little early, but it is a good question. Might be a hard one if you want to take a crack at it. What advice would you give to someone when doctors brush them off because I need to lose weight?
Yeah, I would just challenge it. Come right out and say it if you feel comfortable enough. Say, would you be saying the same thing to a thin person? Like, what would you do with these same exact symptoms with a thin person? Because I would like, you to investigate it from that perspective. I've gone to, it's just ridiculous, like how people will focus on your weight when it has nothing to do with what you came in there for. There was even a story somewhere of, I can't remember where I read it, but someone had a ruptured appendix and they went to the ER and they were complaining about abdominal pain. And they sent them home because they're in a larger body. And they were like, yeah, you need to work on your fitness, blah, 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 instead of addressing their ruptured appendix. And a friend of mine had a broken bone in her foot that she kept complaining about the pain. And they said, oh, it's probably pain from being overweight. And even though there's not much you can do for a broken bone in your foot, but still, I mean, you could have checked and let her know, like, you're not imagining this and there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to wait for it to heal, instead of fat shaming her and telling her stuff she already knew. It's like we knew we were large when we got to the office. We did not come here for you to tell us stuff that we already know. Could you please actually try and assess my symptoms? And if that doesn't work, actually, challenging them and asking them to dig a little deeper. Don't be afraid to shop around for someone else. And I personally like to tell people, well, I'm going to get a second opinion because I'm not satisfied with that answer. Maybe they'll think about it later.
I have done the can you please write that down? Can you write down that you denied this test for me thing? I'm like,
I would think that would really change some things.
Oh man, I need to know that I can sue someone. No.
I can see that really. They'll probably just walk out of the office in a huff. But that's okay. That's not the provider for you.
Yeah. I think it is important to shop around for providers. Yeah, and just to stand up for yourself. Doctors are not the end all be all. You can trust your intuition, I think.
Absolutely, because you're with yourself all day long. And to me, a good physician or a type of physician I want to work with, they acknowledge that you know when something's off. You may not know exactly what it is, but your greatest resource as a diagnostician is going to be the patient and what they've noticed. So ignoring them makes no sense. That's like trying to solve the problem with one hand behind your back.
Can I throw a question in the ring?
Yeah.
As a dietitian, how do you handle the concept of eating healthy while dealing with people who might fixate on things, like people who are struggling with anorexia or orthorexia, I think it's called, which is the obsession with healthy eating?
Yeah, I don't work with any weight loss anymore. Mm-hmm. And if I get a client who, says they just want to feel better, but you can tell through what they keep bringing the conversation back around to that they want to feel better and be smaller, I just let them know that's not what we're going to focus on here. And if it happens, fine, but we're not going to do intentional weight loss because there's a lot of people who need to gain weight and they absolutely don't want to hear that. So if they're not there yet, I mean, it's really disappointing, some of the interventions that are out there for eating disorders, because in some facilities they'll have the ED clinic on this side and then there's a weight loss clinic on the other side. So then you will accept the exact same disordered eating behaviors from somebody who's fat. But if somebody thin has those symptoms, that's fine. When obviously disordered eating is disordered eating, and you should never be encouraging disordered eating as a health intervention. That just doesn't make any sense. And the goal is to get to the point where you're feeding your body what it's asking you for. You wouldn't ask anybody, how many times do you think I should breathe today? Nobody would ever do that. So why are we trying so hard to get other people to tell us how much we should be eating? Even I know there's some people who are afraid to try intuitive eating because they think they're going to eat, cookies all day for months. Not a chance. I mean, anybody who's ever bought, what were those things called? Candy corn after you moved out. You didn't have a parent to tell you, no, you cannot have the whole bag. You learn pretty quickly that your body's going to say, I do not want any more candy corn. Your body's not going to say this feels great, let's just keep eating candy and nothing else. Not a chance.
Yeah. I personally found that the less I was restrictive about what I was able to eat, the less I crave things that I would consider unhealthy. It's as soon as you lift off that I can't have it kind of attitude, you end up realizing you do want vegetables a lot of the time.
Yeah, because I've definitely had that experience on vacation where you're constantly on the road and 4 days in, everybody's like, if I don't get a salad, I'm going to cry. I just need some green leafy vegetables. I cannot eat another power bar. Like, I've had enough. So really, our bodies deserve so much more credit than they're given. The fact that I just remembered I said I was going to read. I even picked out my passage.
Oh yeah,
Let
do
me
you want
just
to
read it
round
first.
off this event with a passage reading, and then
Okay,
we'll
perfect.
sign up? All right.
Okay, because
I
this
will.
totally brought this to mind.
I will leave you to it. Are you okay with signing off yourself?
Okay, sure, I can do that.
I just didn't want to like sit here just like while you're. I'd rather the focus is on you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
So this is from chapter 4, which is entitled Trusting Your Body. Let me get that screenshot. Your existence is a testament to the body wisdom of your ancestors. You exist because your ancestors' bodies had the wisdom to keep them alive in hostile and friendly environments alike. Not only is your body more qualified than your conscious mind to take care of your physiological needs, your body is infinitely more informed about what you need to thrive than the companies trying to sell you solutions to your supposed weight problems. Your body has a vested interest in its own preservation. You do not need external help to know when and how deeply to inhale. You don't need external guidance to figure out when to urinate. Your body is equally capable of regulating energy needs. When your body requires more energy, it sends you signals to eat. When your body has what it needs, you're sent signals to stop eating. Accepting that your body is fully capable of taking care of you without outside help might be difficult after so many years of being told that the body cannot be trusted. To further complicate things, if you've been ignoring your body for a long time, hearing what signals your body is sending you will be a skill you will have to rebuild. But the good news is, this is a skill that you have. This isn't learning something new, it's remembering more than anything else. So it can be done. I hope you'll pick up the book. You see the link here at the bottom. Share it with all your friends. I'm trying to get this message out far and wide. Literally, like a couple of weeks before the book launched, Instagram decided they didn't want me there anymore under mysterious circumstances. So I am relying on community and people who love the book to share it with others. If you love it, leave a review wherever. On Goodreads, it's perfect. Exactly. Classic Instagram. Whenever I mention it to somebody, nobody's surprised. They're just like, yep, like who knows? Getting in touch with a real person to figure out the problem, forget it. So please share, please review. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope I'll hear from you. If you want to tell me what you thought about the book or send me a question, you can just email me. I answer all my emails. If you just respond to the newsletter, it literally comes straight to my inbox, or you can just email me. That's what we're doing now that, I'm laying off of social media. So that is all. I hope you all have a wonderful day and that you've enjoyed this time with me.